Finally put your money to good use, Matthew announced, his voice cutting clearly through the low, sophisticated hum of the expensive steakhouse. He was waving a crisp, white piece of paper in the air like a winning lottery ticket, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. You can thank me later, little brother. I just fast-tracked your retirement. Across the heavy mahogany table, my mother beamed. Her eyes crinkled with absolute, unadulterated pride, the kind of look she only ever reserved for her oldest son. My father let out a hearty chuckle, raising his glass of overpriced Cabernet Sauvignon in a toast to his golden boy. They actually started clapping. Real, genuine applause right there in the middle of a packed restaurant. Uncle Paul, sitting at the end of the booth, nodded his head in solemn approval, slapping his hand on the table. I did not clap. I did not smile. I just sat there, staring at the piece of paper Matthew confidently tossed onto my empty plate. It was a bank transfer receipt. The numbers printed in bold, undeniable black ink stared back at me. $2,287,543.18. Transferred out. Gone. At that exact second, my phone started vibrating furiously against my thigh. It wasn't a standard text message alert. It was a sustained, aggressive buzz. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out under the cover of the tablecloth. The screen was lit up with glaring red notifications from a secure, heavily encrypted government application. Transfer detected. Unauthorized access confirmed. Tracking initiated. Stand by for tactical response. Before I tell you exactly what happened when the federal government realized my brother had just stolen over $2 million of highly classified evidence, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit down, and listen to the whole story, because you are not going to believe the absolute audacity of my family. They thought they had just taken my life savings. They thought they had finally put me in my place, teaching the cowardly younger brother how the real world works. They had absolutely no idea they had just tripped the wire on a massive federal investigation, and that my phone was currently broadcasting our exact GPS location to a heavily armed FBI cyber task force. I looked up from the glowing red screen of my phone. Matthew was wearing this incredibly punchable smirk. He leaned back in his tufted leather chair, casually adjusting his expensive silk tie, waiting for me to bow down and express my deepest gratitude. He looked so incredibly pleased with himself. He had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He truly believed he was untouchable. He thought he was the smartest guy in the room, the apex predator of the business world. I just let the silence stretch. I felt my jaw clench so tightly my teeth ached, a single vein throbbing hard at my temple. The anger I felt wasn't a fiery, explosive rage. It was cold. It was absolute, freezing ice running through my veins. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew that the money he had just brazenly transferred into his personal escrow account wasn't a trust fund. It wasn't some secret inheritance from a long-lost relative. And it certainly wasn't my personal savings account. That money belonged to the United States Department of Justice. It was a massive pool of seized digital assets recovered from an international cyber syndicate, and I was the senior digital forensics analyst appointed as the sole custodian of that specific evidence account. My mother leaned across the table, placing her heavily jeweled hand over mine. "Say thank you to your brother, Carter," she urged, her voice dripping with that condescending sweetness she always used when talking down to me. "He's doing you a huge favor. You've always been so terrible with finances, sweetie. It's about time someone in the family took charge of your future." I looked at her hand, taking in the diamond rings my father had bought her, then looked up at her face. The sheer, terrifying delusion was staggering. To understand why Matthew thought he could get away with stealing millions of dollars from his own brother, and why my parents were actively celebrating a massive federal felony in the middle of a crowded, high-end restaurant, I have to take you back. I have to tell you about 20 years of living in the suffocating shadow of a man who believed the world owed him absolutely everything. They thought this was a game. They thought I was just the quiet, boring younger brother working a dead-end tech job, living in a cheap apartment and driving a beat-up car. They didn't know the quiet life was a carefully constructed cover. They didn't know the stakes. But they were about to find out, and the fallout was going to shatter our family permanently. Growing up, there was only one unwritten rule in our household. Matthew comes first. It was an unspoken law, woven so deeply into the very fabric of our family dynamics that to question it was considered absolute treason. Matthew was older by 4 years. He was taller, louder, and possessed a natural manipulative charisma that blinded my parents to every single one of his toxic flaws. If Matthew brought home a C on a math test, he was praised for his effort, and my parents would immediately schedule a meeting to complain that the teacher was too harsh and didn't understand his creative learning style. If I brought home straight A's, I was briefly patted on the head and then asked why I didn't join the varsity football team like my brother. My achievements were always an afterthought. His failures were always a tragic injustice perpetrated by the universe. I remember clearly when I was 17 years old. I had been saving up money by working exhausting weekend shifts at a local hardware store, hauling bags of mulch and mixing paint. I kept my earnings in a small metal lockbox shoved deep under my bed. I was saving for a decent laptop for college. One afternoon, I came home from a shift covered in dust, only to find the lockbox dragged out into the middle of my room. The cheap metal lock was busted open. The cash inside, almost $800 I had bled for, was entirely gone. I marched downstairs, my blood boiling, ready to confront him. My parents were sitting in the living room watching television. Before I could even finish shouting my accusation, my father held up a hand to silence me. "Calm down, Carter," my dad said, not even looking up from the screen. "Your brother needed it. He found a great deal on a reliable car for college, and he was a little short on the down payment. You left that money sitting in a box doing nothing. He put it to good use. You should be happy to help the family." That was the phrase. That was always the justification. Put it to good use. It was the exact same sickening rationale Matthew had just used in the restaurant. My property wasn't my property. It was a family resource waiting to be reallocated to the golden child. It didn't stop there. My parents literally drained my own modest college fund a few years later. I was in my freshman year when I got a call from the financial aid office saying my tuition check had bounced. When I called home, my mother wept on the phone, explaining that Matthew had racked up massive, crippling credit card debt during his sophomore year. He was going to be sued. They had to empty the accounts to bail him out. "You're smart, Carter," my mother had sniffled. "You can take out student loans. You can figure it out. Matthew needs a clean slate. He has so much potential, we just can't let this ruin his credit." I learned very early on that in my family, my boundaries, my property, and my future were all entirely expendable if it served Matthew's interests. I was expected to set myself on fire to keep him warm. So I adapted. I learned to survive by becoming invisible. I moved out the day after I graduated high school and never asked them for a dime. I put myself through college, eating cheap ramen noodles, working night shifts at a data center, and taking out the maximum amount of federal loans. I buried myself in computer science, cryptography, and network security. I discovered I had a real, undeniable talent for digital forensics, for finding the hidden trails people leave behind in the dark, encrypted corners of the internet. I liked the logic of it. The math didn't lie. Data didn't play favorites. When I was recruited by the FBI right out of grad school, it felt like a calling. I finally found an environment where rules actually mattered, where actions had severe, inescapable consequences, and where the truth couldn't be twisted by a manipulative smile or a mother's enabling tears. But my work was highly classified. I was placed in the cybercrime division, tracking down organized syndicates that stole millions from hospitals, elderly pensioners, and municipal governments. Because of the sensitive nature of my targets, I had to maintain a strict cover. I couldn't tell my family I was a federal agent. I couldn't brag about my security clearance or the dangerous people I put behind bars. Instead, I told them I worked in mid-level IT support for a boring logistics company. I maintained a very intentional, unassuming lifestyle. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the bumper. I rented a small, nondescript one-bedroom apartment. I bought my clothes off the rack at discount stores. In my line of work, blending in is survival. But to my family, my cover story was just confirmation of everything they had always believed about me. I was a failure. I lacked ambition. I was the disappointing, cowardly younger brother who couldn't measure up to Matthew's flashy, aggressive, successful lifestyle. While I was quietly building a career tracking international criminals, Matthew was busy building a house of cards. He bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. He called himself a serial entrepreneur. He wore custom-tailored suits, leased expensive luxury cars he couldn't actually afford, and threw around corporate buzzwords to make himself sound incredibly important. Behind closed doors, his life was an absolute disaster. He went through a very nasty public divorce a few years back. His ex-wife, who finally got tired of his constant lying and financial infidelity, took him to the cleaners. She exposed his massive hidden debts and his habit of funneling marital assets into shady crypto startups. It was a brutal custody battle. He almost lost all visitation rights to his 2 kids because he couldn't maintain a stable household or a steady income. Did my parents hold him accountable for destroying his own family? Of course not. They immediately rushed to his defense. They drained a massive chunk of their retirement savings to hire a ruthless, high-priced lawyer for him. They blamed the ex-wife, calling her a gold digger. They blamed the family court judge. They blamed everyone except the man who had actually caused the wreckage. Matthew was, as always, the tragic victim of circumstances, a brilliant mind constantly dragged down by lesser people. Meanwhile, my real career was thriving. I was making a fantastic salary, far more than my fake IT job implied. I was actually up for a major promotion to assistant section chief of my division. But I kept my mouth shut. I let them think I was struggling. I let them pay for my dinners when we occasionally met, enduring their thinly veiled pity. I sat there at the restaurant table, gripping the cool glass of my water goblet. The memories flooded my mind, a bitter, exhausting highlight reel of a lifetime of disrespect. They had always taken from me my peace, my money, my dignity, and I had always let them, choosing to walk away and build my own life rather than fight a pointless battle against 2 parents who worshipped the ground my brother walked on. But tonight was different. He hadn't just stolen my childhood savings this time. He had crossed a massive federal line that I couldn't protect him from, even if I wanted to. And sitting there, looking at his arrogant face under the dim restaurant lights, I realized something profound. I didn't want to protect him anymore. I was tired of being the sacrificial lamb on the altar of his ego. The dinner had started off toxic from the very moment we arrived. Matthew had chosen this specific place to assert dominance. It was the kind of restaurant where the waiters wear crisp white tuxedos, the menus don't have prices printed on them, and the air smells heavily of aged beef and expensive truffle oil. Matthew made a huge, embarrassing show of handing his valet ticket to the hostess, speaking loudly to ensure everyone in the lobby knew he had pulled up in a brand-new, jet black Porsche 911. Rented it for the weekend. He had bragged to my father, slapping him on the back as we were led to our table. You have to dress for the job you want, right? Or in my case, the lifestyle you deserve. You project wealth, you attract wealth. My parents ate it up. They ordered the most expensive appetizers on the menu without hesitating. Jumbo shrimp cocktails that cost $50 a pop, Wagyu beef sliders, imported caviar. I ordered a simple house salad and a glass of tap water, not wanting to contribute to the absurd bill. Still counting pennies, Carter? Matthew had sneered, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. You know, if you ever want to upgrade from that rusted-out Honda of yours, I could probably get you an entry-level administrative position at my new firm. The salary isn't great, but it beats fixing printers and resetting passwords for a living. I didn't take the bait. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I'm doing fine, Matthew. I like my job. It's stable. Uncle Paul scoffed loudly from across the table. Paul was a bitter, divorced man who had never achieved anything significant in his life, but loved giving unsolicited financial advice. Fine doesn't build wealth, Carter. You need to take risks. Look at your brother. He's out there making moves, shaking hands. You sit in a cubicle hiding from the world. It's embarrassing, frankly. You're 32 years old. Time to grow up. Leave him alone, Paul, my mother said, though her tone was dripping with pity and condescension. Carter just doesn't have the entrepreneurial spirit. He likes playing it safe, even if his life is a little stagnant. Stagnant. I let the word wash over me, completely unbothered. If they only knew. If they only knew that just 3 hours ago, I was sitting in a secure, windowless briefing room at the local field office, mapping out the complex money laundering networks of a Russian cartel. If they knew I commanded a team of 12 elite agents. But I kept my mouth shut. The shrimp arrived. Matthew dug in, chewing loudly, holding court at the head of the table like a king addressing his peasants. It's all about leverage, Matthew declared, using his silver fork to point directly at me. You see, Carter, the problem with you is you're terrified of losing. You have a poverty mindset, so you stash your little pathetic paychecks in a savings account, letting inflation eat it alive year after year. You're practically losing money by being a coward. I carefully placed my fork down on the edge of my plate. I prefer financial stability over reckless gambling, Matthew. Matthew laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made a few people at the next table turn and look. Gambling? That's what poor people call investing. He had spent the entire first hour of the dinner systematically picking me apart, layer by layer, in front of the whole family. It was a performance. He needed to shrink me down so he could feel taller. And my parents, along with Uncle Paul, formed his perfect, enabling audience. They nodded along with every insult, adding their own little jabs and critiques of my clothes, my car, my apartment. They were setting the stage. They were building the narrative that Matthew was the financial savior of the bloodline, and I was the hopeless, incompetent child who needed a drastic intervention. I just didn't realize the intervention involved committing a massive federal heist. After the main courses were cleared by the silent, efficient waitstaff, Matthew leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. The mood shifted. He adopted this very serious, hushed, businesslike tone. The reason I brought everyone together tonight, Matthew began, making deep eye contact with our parents, is to celebrate a major, life-changing milestone. I am officially entering the commercial real estate game. My father let out a low, impressed whistle. Commercial? Son, that's the big leagues. Exactly, Dad. Matthew grinned, his chest puffing out. I've partnered up with a guy named Dylan. Brilliant developer. Absolute shark. We are closing on a massive strip mall complex on the east side of the city. 3 major anchor tenants are already secured. It's a gold mine. The cash flow projections are insane. He started throwing out numbers and complex financial terms rapidly. Cap rates, amortization schedules, mezzanine financing, triple net leases. To my parents and Uncle Paul, it sounded like Wall Street magic. They were mesmerized. But to me, it sounded like a badly rehearsed pitch from a late-night real estate infomercial. I listen to financial criminals lie for a living. I track illicit funds through shell companies, offshore accounts, and complex crypto mixers. I know exactly what real investment structuring looks like. Matthew was using the terms completely wrong. He was combining concepts that made absolutely no financial or legal sense. He was blowing smoke. What's the buy-in? Uncle Paul asked, leaning in, his eyes wide with greed. Total purchase price is $11.5 million, Matthew said smoothly, not missing a beat. Dylan has the traditional financing lined up with a major institutional lender, but we needed the hard cash for the 20% down payment to lock in the escrow. $2.3 million. He said the number slowly, letting it hang heavily in the air above our table. 2.3 million. That's incredible, honey, my mother gasped, clutching her chest in awe. But where did you get that kind of capital? Did the bank approve a secondary mezzanine loan? Matthew's smile widened into something truly predatory. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with a mix of triumph and malice. No, Mom, I didn't need a bank. I realized I had an untapped, Wasted resource right here in the family. That was when he reached into his tailored suit jacket. That was when he pulled out the folded piece of paper. The receipt. I decided to take Carter's dead money and bring it to life, Matthew said proudly. And then the paper landed on my plate. I looked from the paper to Matthew. What is this? My voice was entirely deadpan, devoid of any panic. It's an executed wire transfer, Matthew said, leaning back and crossing his arms. From your high-yield savings account directly into my escrow account for the property deal. Cleared the Fed wire system less than 2 hours ago. The silence in my head was deafening, even as the table erupted into applause. I stared at the account number printed on the receipt. It was the routing number for a heavily monitored holding account managed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 3 years ago, my cyber unit had busted a massive ransomware ring operating out of Eastern Europe. We recovered millions in stolen cryptocurrency. We liquidated the digital assets and placed them into a secure federal evidence account pending trial and restitution to the hundreds of victims. Because I was the lead analyst who traced the funds and cracked the encryption, I was legally designated as the custodian of record. My name was attached to the account for internal DOJ tracking purposes, but the money belonged entirely to the United States government. And Matthew had just wired it out. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my water glass in his face. I didn't lunge across the table and grab him by his expensive silk tie. My federal training kicked in cold, absolute, and methodical. I needed him to establish intent. I needed him to confess to the exact mechanics of the crime, right here out loud in front of 4 witnesses. Matthew, I said, my voice dangerously calm, barely above a whisper. The table quieted down immediately, sensing the severe shift in my tone. How exactly did you access that account? Matthew rolled his eyes, taking an arrogant sip of his scotch. Oh, don't act like it was Fort Knox, Carter. You're incredibly sloppy for an IT guy. Remember Thanksgiving? You came home for the weekend and left your heavy laptop bag in my old bedroom. My stomach turned to ice. Thanksgiving. I had been forced to bring a secure secondary laptop home to do some emergency administrative work for an ongoing case. I kept it locked inside a biometric travel safe, hidden at the bottom of my duffel bag. You broke into my locked belongings, I stated flatly. It wasn't a question. I wanted the verbal confirmation. I picked a cheap combination lock on that little black box you had, Matthew corrected, waving his hand dismissively as if breaking and entering was a minor faux pas. Inside, you had a leather notebook. You actually wrote down your banking passwords, Carter? Real secure. I found your social security card tucked in the back flap too, and a few old bank statements. That's all the leverage I needed. You stole my social security card and my passwords. I borrowed them to evaluate your financial portfolio, Matthew said defensively, raising his voice slightly. And I'm extremely glad I did. When I logged in and saw over $2 million just sitting there, earning a pathetic interest rate, I almost had a heart attack. I knew you were cheap, but hoarding that kind of cash while the family is out here struggling to build wealth? It's utterly selfish, Carter. It's borderline psychotic. Matthew, my mother chimed in, her voice taking on a soothing maternal tone. She reached over to pat his arm. Don't be too hard on him. Carter just doesn't understand money. You're helping him. He'll see that eventually. I stared at my mother, completely horrified by her moral bankruptcy. Mom, he broke into my private belongings. He stole my identity. He committed theft. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Carter. Uncle Paul scoffed loudly, pointing his steak knife at me. He's your brother. Family looks out for family. He's managing your assets because you clearly don't have the stomach for it. I turned my absolute, undivided focus back to Matthew. Banks don't just let you wire $2.3 million online without intense verification, Matthew. There are security holds, daily limits, fraud triggers. Matthew grinned broadly, clearly eager to show off how brilliant and clever he thought he was. You think I'm an amateur? You think I just clicked a button? I planned this for weeks, Carter. I used an AI voice modulation app one bought online to mimic your voice. I called the bank's high net worth fraud department yesterday, verified all your security questions using the info from your little notebook, and pre-authorized a massive capital deployment. Then, to avoid the automated red flags, I broke the transfers down. I initiated 3 separate wires just under the reporting threshold over the last 48 hours, and pushed the final bulk transfer through this afternoon. He had thought of everything. He had premeditated this entire operation. It wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion or a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, multi-day cyber heist, identity theft, and wire fraud. You spoofed my voice to bypass banking security protocols. I repeated slowly, making sure my phone, which was now actively recording high-definition audio via the FBI Secure app in my pocket, picked up every single syllable. I did what I had to do to get the deal done, Matthew snapped, losing a bit of his smugness under my intense stare. Dylan needed the funds in escrow today or we'd lose the property to another buyer. I wasn't going to let your cowardice and hoarding ruin my future. And what exactly is my role in your brilliant future, Matthew? I asked, keeping my voice terrifyingly level. Matthew's smile returned, broad and magnanimous. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide like a benevolent king addressing his subjects. Partners, little brother. I'm not a monster. It was your capital, after all. Even though I found the deal, negotiated the brutal terms, and took all the operational risk, I am cutting you in. A clean 60-40 split of the net profits. 60 for you, 40 for me. Using 100% of my money. You should be on your knees thanking him, Uncle Paul interjected, slamming his fist down on the table so hard the water glasses rattled. He's basically handing you free money. You're going to see annual returns you couldn't even dream of sitting in your little cubicle. Say thank you, Carter. My father ordered, his voice stern, demanding total obedience. Your brother stepped up and took control because you wouldn't. This is how you build a family legacy. You should be grateful he included you at all instead of just taking it as a loan. I looked around the table. For adults, completely blinded by greed and their unwavering cult-like worship of Matthew, they were aggressively demanding I show gratitude to a man who had just proudly confessed to committing multiple federal felonies against me. They were justifying theft, identity fraud, and betrayal, dressing it up in the language of family values and investment strategies. Under the table, I unlocked my phone. The FBI encrypted app was flashing bright red. I opened the direct chat window to Special Agent Rebecca Torres, my unit chief. Subject has confessed. Identity theft, wire fraud, unauthorized access. Audio recorded and uploaded to cloud server. I typed rapidly with my thumb. A second later, the 3 typing dots appeared. Rebecca replied, assets already frozen at receiving institution. Escrow account locked down by federal warrant. Tactical units are 3 minutes out. Do not break cover until we enter the premises. I slid the phone back into my pocket, my heart rate steady, my mind perfectly clear. I'm not going to thank you, Matthew, I said. The temperature at the table plummeted instantly. Matthew's face hardened. The charming, benevolent facade dropped, replaced by ugly, raw hostility. Excuse me, I'm not going to thank you for committing wire fraud, I said clearly, looking him dead in the eyes. I'm not going to thank you for identity theft, and I'm certainly not going to thank you for losing $2.3 million to a known con artist. Matthew let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, looking around the table for support. Losing it? Are you deaf, Carter? It's fully secured in an escrow account for a prime commercial property. It's safer there than in your stupid bank. Is it? I tilted my head. I had spent the last 2 days intensely reviewing the back-end data of Matthew's financial history. As soon as our automated systems flagged his first unauthorized login attempt, I pulled his entire digital footprint. I knew everything about his miserable, fake life. Let's talk about Dylan, I said quietly. Your brilliant developer partner, the absolute shark. Does Dylan actually own the development rights to that strip mall? Or did he just buy you a few expensive drinks, show you some glossy brochures printed at FedEx, and present a fake land deed? Matthew's left eye twitched. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Dylan is currently under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI Financial Crimes Unit for running a massive, multi-state Ponzi scheme, Matthew. He targets desperate, naive, fake-rich investors who want to look important. He takes their cash, promises them equity in commercial properties he doesn't own, and uses it to pay off his older investors before vanishing. That's a lie, Matthew hissed, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped his empty glass. You don't know anything about him. You don't know anything about high-level business. I know that you are drowning in debt, I continued, my voice steady, relentless, tearing down his reality brick by brick. I know that you owe over $200,000 to various aggressive creditors from your failed cryptocurrency ventures. I know you haven't paid child support to your ex-wife in 3 months. You didn't steal that money to build a family legacy, Matthew. You stole it because you are desperate, drowning, and Dylan promised you a quick, miraculous payout that would save you from total bankruptcy. My mother gasped, dropping her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter. She looked at Matthew in absolute horror, the illusion finally beginning to crack. Matthew, is that true? Are you bankrupt? The lawyer for the custody case. We gave you $50,000 for that. Shut up. Matthew slammed his open hand on the table, rattling the expensive silverware and drawing stares from across the room. He pointed a shaking, furious finger at me. You're making this up. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. You're trying to ruin this deal because you can't stand to see me succeed where you failed. There is no success to be jealous of, I said simply, showing no emotion. It's all a mirage, pathetic illusion, just like this dinner, just like that rented Porsche outside that you probably maxed out your last credit card to get. How dare you speak to your brother that way? My father roared, half standing out of his chair, his face flushed purple with rage. He is trying to help this family. He is a businessman. You are an ungrateful, spiteful little boy who wants to drag everyone down to your level. He's not a businessman, Dad. He's a thief, I said, looking my father dead in the eye, refusing to back down. And tonight, he stole from the exact wrong person. The restaurant had grown uncomfortably quiet around us. The soft jazz music playing over the speakers seemed entirely out of place. The tables nearby had stopped their conversations, their eyes darting toward our escalating drama. A waiter hovered nervously near the kitchen doors, unsure if he should intervene. My mother started crying, dabbing her eyes with her expensive cloth napkin, smearing her makeup. Why are you doing this, Carter? Why do you have to ruin everything just when we were celebrating? Your brother made a mistake. Maybe he shouldn't have gone into your safe without asking, but his heart was in the right place. We can fix this within the family. We always fix things in the family. Fix this, I echoed, the sheer, staggering absurdity of her statement washing over me. Mom, he stole over $2 million. There is no fixing this within the family. This isn't a broken vase in the living room. This isn't a bad report card. This is a massive, life-destroying crime. He'll give it back, Uncle Paul argued, though he looked considerably less confident now, his eyes darting nervously between me and Matthew. If this Dylan guy is a fraud like you say, Matthew will just call his broker and pull the money out of escrow tomorrow morning. No harm, no foul. Everyone just take a breath. It doesn't work that way, I said, feeling a profound, heavy sense of exhaustion. I looked at the people who raised me. I had given them every chance over the years. I had endured the insults, the neglect, the blatant, painful favoritism. I sat here tonight and gave them one final chance to show a shred of moral decency. But even faced with undeniable, confessed theft, they chose to protect the golden child. They chose the illusion. Matthew was hyperventilating slightly, his chest heaving, his eyes darting around the restaurant like a cornered animal realizing the trap has sprung. I'll transfer it back, he muttered, his voice shaking. He yanked his phone out of his pocket, his fingers fumbling with the screen. Fine. You want to be a poor loser forever? Fine. I'll call the automated banking line right now and reverse the wire. Then you can take your pathetic little life and go back to your miserable apartment and rot. He frantically tapped on his screen, trying to log into his banking app. His face was pale, sweating profusely under the restaurant lights. It's too late for that, Matthew, I said softly. Shut up. I'm doing it right now, he spat, his thumb furiously hitting the screen. Loading, loading. Come on. Suddenly, he froze. His thumb hovered over the glass. All the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He stared at his phone, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. What's wrong? My father asked, panic finally, truly edging into his voice. Matthew, what does it say? My accounts, Matthew whispered, his voice trembling so badly I could barely hear him. It says, access denied. Both my personal and the escrow. Says, account frozen by federal order. He looked up at me, the arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. Carter, what did you do? I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I reached to my left wrist and slowly, deliberately, unbuckled the cheap, digital watch I always wore. The exact same watch Matthew had mocked mercilessly during the appetizer course. I placed it neatly on the table next to my water glass. Then, I reached inside my plain, unbranded suit jacket. I pulled out a heavy, leather wallet. I flipped it open and placed it dead center on the white tablecloth, right next to the $2.3 million transfer receipt Matthew had thrown at me. The heavy gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed brightly under the restaurant's ambient lighting. Next to it was my official laminated identification card. Carter Mason, Senior Special Agent, Cyber Crime Division. I took my phone out of my pocket and set it right next to the badge. The screen was still glowing bright red, displaying the active tracking sequence and the live audio recording wavelength. The entire table stared at the items. The air in our booth seemed to vanish. My mother stared at the badge, her mouth hanging open. She looked from the gold shield to my face, then back to the shield, as if trying to reconcile the disappointing, cowardly son she thought she knew with the man sitting in front of her. Carter, what is that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Is that fake? Are you playing a joke? It's real, Mom, I said, my voice projecting a cold, hard authority I had hidden from them for half a decade. I don't work in IT support. I am a federal agent. I hunt down international cyber syndicates for the United States government. I turned my cold gaze back to Matthew. He was visibly shaking now. His phone slipped from his sweaty grip and clattered loudly onto his plate. And that account you hacked into? I continued, the words dropping like heavy anvils onto the table. That wasn't my personal savings. That was a heavily monitored, highly classified federal evidence account. The money you stole belongs to the Department of Justice. It is physical evidence in an ongoing international criminal trial. No, Matthew breathed, violently shaking his head back and forth. No, no, no. You're lying. You're just a tech guy. You fix computers. By accessing that account, I said, reciting the facts methodically, devoid of any brotherly affection, you committed unauthorized access to a protected federal computer system. By moving the funds across state lines, you committed theft of government property, wire fraud, identity theft, and tampering with federal evidence. You set him up, Uncle Paul yelled, suddenly standing up, pointing an accusing finger at me. You entrapped your own brother. I'll call a lawyer. I'll have you fired. He set himself up, Paul, I said calmly, not even looking at him. He stole the information. He made the calls. He initiated the wire. Before anyone else could scream or argue, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. For men and women dressed in dark, tailored suits and tactical vests walked in. They didn't stop at the hostess stand. They didn't wait to be seated. They moved with absolute, synchronized purpose, weaving swiftly through the crowded tables, their eyes locked directly on our booth. At the front of the formation was Special Agent Rebecca Torres, her gold badge already clipped prominently to her belt, her hand resting near her holstered weapon. Her face was a mask of absolute professional stone. The storm hadn't just begun. It had arrived, and it was going to tear Matthew's life down to the studs. Rebecca reached our table, her eyes scanning the terrified faces of my parents before locking onto Matthew. "Matthew Mason?" she asked, her voice carrying across the silent dining room. Matthew couldn't speak. He just sat there, frozen, tears beginning to well up in his eyes. He slowly nodded. "I am Special Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI Cybercrime Division," she stated loudly and clearly. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and the theft of federal property." Two agents flanked him instantly. One grabbed his arm, hauling him up from his expensive leather chair. Wait, please!" my father cried out, lunging forward, finally realizing the severity of the situation. "This is a misunderstanding. He's a good boy. He didn't know." "Sir, step back immediately," one of the agents barked, stepping between my father and Matthew, his hand raised in a strict warning. My father froze, his hands in the air. Rebecca pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from her belt. The sound of the ratchets clicking into place echoed loudly as she secured Matthew's wrists behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent," she began, reading him his Miranda rights as the entire restaurant watched in stunned, breathless silence. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Matthew looked over his shoulder at me, his face twisted in absolute panic and betrayal. Carter, please, tell them it's a mistake. I'm your brother." I picked up my badge, sliding it back into my wallet, and pocketed my phone. I looked at the man who had tormented me my entire life. "You're not my brother right now," I said coldly. "Right now, you're just a suspect. Right now, you're just a suspect." Those were the last words I said to my brother before the reality of his situation completely crushed him. Matthew collapsed inward. The broad shoulders that he always puffed out to intimidate people suddenly slumped. The expensive silk tie he had adjusted so proudly just an hour ago now looked like a noose around his neck. Agent Torres did not give him a moment to process. She and Agent Gabriel hauled Matthew to his feet. The sound of the steel handcuffs locking into place was incredibly loud in the dead-silent restaurant. It was a sharp, metallic click that echoed off the mahogany walls and the crystal chandeliers. Every single patron in the dining room had stopped eating. Forks were suspended in mid-air. Waiters stood frozen against the walls. They were all watching the golden child of the Mason family being treated exactly like the criminal he was. My mother finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She leaped out of the leather booth, her diamond bracelets clinking wildly against each other. She rushed toward Agent Torres, her hands outstretched, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Stop it! You can't do this! Do you know who he is?" she screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "He is a respected businessman. He didn't mean to steal anything. Carter, tell them. Tell them to take those off him right now." Agent Gabriel immediately stepped into her path, his hand raised in a strict, unyielding gesture. "Ma'am, I need you to step back right now. Do not interfere with a federal arrest. If you touch an agent, you will be detained for obstruction of justice. Step back." My father stood up, his face flushed a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her back before she could do something that would land her in a holding cell next to her precious son. But his eyes were fixed entirely on me. The hatred I saw in his expression was something I will never forget. It wasn't just anger. It was absolute disgust. "You planned this?" my father spat out, his voice shaking with venom. "You sat there all night, letting him talk, letting us celebrate, knowing you had this trap waiting for him. You are sick, Carter. You are a sick, vindictive little coward." I looked up at him from the booth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I didn't steal his passwords, Dad. I didn't forge his voice. I didn't initiate a massive wire fraud over 3 days. Matthew built the trap, baited it, and walked right into it all by himself. All I did was refuse to pull him out. Matthew was sobbing now. Real ugly tears. As the agents turned him toward the front doors, he looked back at the table. He looked at the remnants of his extravagant celebration. The empty cocktail glasses, the half-eaten Wagyu beef, the receipt for $2.3 million sitting right next to my gold FBI badge. "Mom! Dad! Call my lawyer! Please call my lawyer!" Matthew wailed, his voice cracking loudly as the agents escorted him through the heavy wooden doors and out into the cool night air. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles waiting outside painted the restaurant windows in harsh, unforgiving strokes. And just like that, he was gone. The golden boy, the serial entrepreneur, the pride and joy of the family, stripped of his dignity, his freedom, and his illusions in a matter of 5 minutes. The aftermath inside the restaurant was suffocating. My mother collapsed back into the booth, burying her face in her hands, sobbing so violently her shoulders shook. Uncle Paul stood frozen at the edge of the table, his face completely pale, realizing how close he had come to cheering on a federal crime in front of federal agents. My father remained standing. He looked down at me, breathing heavily. "You are no longer a part of this family," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "As of this second, I have only one son, and I will spend every penny I have left to get him out of the mess you put him in." I carefully picked up my badge and slipped it back into my leather wallet. I secured it inside my jacket pocket. "You can spend everything you want, Dad. But this isn't a local dispute. It is the federal government. They have his audio confession, they have his digital footprint, and they have the fraudulent wire transfers. He is going to federal prison." I slid out of the booth and stood up, adjusting my jacket. A young waiter, looking absolutely terrified, slowly approached our table holding a black leather checkbook. His hands were shaking slightly. The bill for the table, sir," the waiter mumbled, not making eye contact. My father glared at the waiter, then turned his back completely, crossing his arms and refusing to acknowledge the situation. Uncle Paul suddenly found the pattern on the carpet fascinating. None of them were going to pay for the celebration dinner they had just hosted for my brother's crimes. I took the leather book from the waiter. The total came to $847.63. Matthew had certainly spared no expense when he thought he was playing with my money. I pulled out my personal credit card and placed it on top of the receipt. I handed it back to the waiter. "Put it all on this," I said quietly, "and add a $400 tip for yourself. I am very sorry for the disturbance tonight." The waiter's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly nodded and scurried away to run the card. "Buying your way out of the guilt?" Uncle Paul sneered from the corner. "You think paying for dinner makes you the bigger man after you just destroyed your brother's life?" I turned to look at Paul. "I didn't destroy his life. His greed did. And if you ever try to lecture me about wealth or risk again, Paul, I will personally audit every single tax return you have filed for the last decade. Do not test me." Paul's mouth snapped shut. He took a physical step back, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. The bravado was completely gone. The waiter returned promptly with my card and the final receipt. I signed it, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and looked at my parents one last time. My mother wouldn't even lift her head from her hands. My father stared at the wall, his jaw tight, completely ignoring my existence. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The bridge wasn't just burned. It was completely vaporized. I walked out of the restaurant alone. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in my entire life, I took a deep, unrestricted breath. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations, their constant judgment, and their toxic comparisons was gone. Felt strange. Felt terrifying. But more than anything, it felt like absolute freedom. I walked past the spot where the federal vehicles had been parked. Matthew's rented Porsche was still sitting in the valet lane, a massive parking ticket already tucked under the windshield wiper. It was the perfect symbol of his entire existence. Flashy on the outside, completely hollow and penalized on the inside. This is the moment that changes everything. This is the exact moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You have been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment the number 1 below to let me know you have made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone out there. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey, because the fallout from that night was wilder than I could have ever imagined. I drove straight to the FBI field office downtown. I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment. I needed the sterile, bright lights of the bureau to keep me grounded. I needed the logic of the job to process the emotional wreckage of the evening. When I walked into the Cybercrime Division bullpen, the atmosphere was electric. Agents were actively moving between desks, analyzing data streams, and compiling the evidence for the prosecutor's office. It was a well-oiled machine, and for the first time, my personal life had collided directly with my professional domain. I walked into the observation room connected to Interrogation Room 3. Special Agent Rebecca Torres was standing there with her arms crossed, looking through the one-way glass. Inside the room, Matthew was sitting at a metal table. His tailored suit jacket was gone. His tie was removed. He looked small, defeated, and completely terrified. He was staring blankly at the wall, probably realizing that his smooth-talking charm wasn't going to work on federal investigators. Rebecca turned to me as I entered. She held out a steaming cup of awful break-room coffee. "You held up well," she said simply. That was a high compliment coming from her. "I just let him talk," I replied, taking the coffee. "Did the audio file upload correctly?" "Perfectly," Rebecca said, tapping a tablet on the console. "It's a prosecutor's dream." He clearly outlined his methodology, admitted to the identity theft, confirmed the wire fraud, and stated his motive. But Carter, it gets crazier. We looked into the escrow account and the guy he mentioned. Dylan. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. Let me guess. The property deal was a complete fabrication. Worse? Rebecca grinned, the thrill of the hunt lighting up her eyes. Dylan is a ghost. His real name is Arthur Vance, and he has a rap sheet a mile long for running elaborate real estate scams. He targets desperate people with bad credit who want to play real estate mogul. Dylan had a flight booked to Dubai leaving tonight at 11 p.m. If Matthew had successfully wired that $2.3 million to Dylan's offshore routing number, the money would have vanished forever. Your brother's theft actually triggered the freeze that prevented Dylan from escaping with millions of dollars from his other victims. I shook my head, a dark, cynical laugh escaping my lips. Matthew thought he was a genius investor. He thought he was outsmarting everyone. In reality, he was the easiest mark in the room. He was a desperate, arrogant fool who was about to hand over federal evidence to a seasoned con artist. We picked up Dylan at the international terminal 40 minutes ago, Rebecca continued. He was furious. He had no idea his patsy had just handed him stolen government funds. We are charging them both. I looked through the glass at my brother. He thought he was destined for greatness. Now he was just a footnote in a larger fraud investigation. The real storm hit the next morning. When I turned my personal cell phone back on, it practically melted in my hand. I had 74 missed calls, over 100 text messages, and dozens of voicemails. The barrage of pure, unadulterated hatred from my family was staggering. My mother's text started out begging. Please, Carter, tell your boss you made a mistake. Please, he's crying in jail. They won't let him have his medication. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted violently. You are a monster. You planned this to humiliate him. I wish I never had you. You are dead to me. My father didn't text. He left long, rambling voicemails, his voice slurring slightly, threatening to sue me, threatening to expose my lies to the press, and explicitly stating that I was completely cut out of the family forever. But the worst one was from Uncle Paul. Paul, emboldened by the distance of a phone line, left a voicemail that crossed a very dangerous line. Listen to me, you arrogant little punk. Paul's voice snarled through the speaker. You think hiding behind a badge makes you untouchable? You ruined your brother's life over a misunderstanding. If you don't drop these charges, I am going to come down to your office and handle you personally. I know people. I will make sure you never walk right again. I listened to the voicemail once, saved the audio file, and walked directly into the office of the assistant director of the field office. In the federal government, threatening a federal officer in the course of their duties is a severe felony. The Bureau does not take it lightly, and they absolutely do not care if the person making the threat is a disgruntled uncle. 3 hours later, Uncle Paul got a visit at his suburban home. 2 heavily armed federal agents knocked on his door, played his voicemail back to him on the front porch in front of his neighbors, and informed him that if he ever contacted me, approached me, or spoke my name in a threatening manner again, he would be joining Matthew in federal holding. Paul practically wet himself. He surrendered his licensed hunting rifles and signed a permanent restraining order. I never heard from him again. I spent the next 3 weeks completely restructuring my personal life. I changed my phone number. I closed my old bank accounts and opened new ones with enhanced security protocols. I broke the lease on my cheap apartment and moved to a high-security building closer to the agency headquarters. I severed every single tie to my past. It was incredibly painful. Some nights, the silence of my new apartment was deafening. But it was a clean pain. It was the pain of a surgeon removing a tumor. It hurt, but I knew I was going to survive. 8 months later, the justice system finally caught up to Matthew's arrogance. The trial was held in the massive, wood-paneled courtroom of the Federal District Court. Because the evidence was so overwhelming, Matthew's high-priced defense lawyer tried to avoid a jury trial, but the prosecution pushed forward. They wanted to make an example of him. I was called as the primary witness for the prosecution. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw my parents sitting in the gallery right behind the defense table. They looked 10 years older. My mother was gaunt, clutching a rosary. My father refused to look at me. Matthew sat at the defense table wearing a shapeless orange jumpsuit. His hair was thinning. He looked pale and exhausted. The tailored suits and the fake bravado were completely gone. When I took the stand, he finally looked up at me. His eyes were completely empty. The defense lawyer's strategy was desperate. He tried to paint Matthew as a victim of severe emotional distress. He brought up Matthew's brutal divorce. He argued that the stress of the brutal custody battle over his children had driven him to a temporary state of mental breakdown. He claimed Matthew wasn't trying to steal the money permanently, but merely trying to secure a quick return to pay off his aggressive divorce lawyer and secure his family's future. The judge, a stern, older man with zero tolerance for white-collar crime, was not having it. When the prosecution played the audio recording from the restaurant, the clear, crisp sound of Matthew bragging about spoofing my voice, bypassing bank security, and mocking my financial prudence, the entire courtroom went dead silent. The defense lawyer literally put his head in his hands. You cannot claim temporary insanity when you spend weeks carefully plotting a multi-tiered cyber heist. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: wire fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to a protected system, and tampering with federal evidence. During the sentencing hearing, the judge looked directly down at Matthew. "Mr. Mason," the judge said, his voice booming across the room, "you sat at a table with your family and proudly boasted about betraying your own brother. You used your intelligence not to build a legitimate life, but to steal, to deceive, and to manipulate. You nearly handed millions of dollars of critical federal evidence to a known scam artist out of pure greed. Your actions show a complete lack of moral character and a dangerous disregard for the law." The judge slammed his gavel. "I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, to be served consecutively, with no possibility of parole before 10 years. My mother let out a horrific, gut-wrenching scream that echoed through the courtroom. She collapsed into my father's arms. Matthew dropped his head onto the table and wept loudly. I stood up from the prosecution bench, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back. 3 years passed. The world kept spinning, and my life changed dramatically for the better. With the massive shadow of my family permanently removed from my life, my career skyrocketed. The discipline and focus I had always possessed were no longer drained by the constant emotional taxation of trying to please people who despised me. I led several high-profile cyber task forces. We took down a major dark web marketplace and seized hundreds of millions in illicit funds. Because of my performance, I received the promotion I had been working toward for years. I was named Assistant Section Chief of the Cybersecurity Division. Along with the title came a massive bump in my salary. I was making more money than Matthew had ever seen in his entire life, even during his best fake years. I bought a beautiful mid-century modern house in a quiet, heavily wooded suburb just outside the city. I traded in my rusted Honda Civic for a reliable, brand-new SUV. I didn't buy a Porsche. I didn't need to project wealth to feel valuable. I found peace in stability. I also built a new family. I surrounded myself with incredible colleagues, mentors, and friends who valued integrity, honesty, and loyalty. We celebrated holidays together. We supported each other through difficult cases. I finally learned what it felt like to be loved and respected for exactly who I was, not for what I could be manipulated into giving. Through extended relatives, I heard bits and pieces about my parents. They sold their house and moved to a retirement community in Florida. They were so deeply ashamed of Matthew's conviction, and so completely steeped in their own delusion, that they created a bizarre lie for their new neighbors. They told everyone in their Florida community that Matthew was overseas doing missionary work, and that I had died tragically in a car accident. They literally killed me off in their minds rather than admit to the world that they had raised a felon and alienated a federal agent. When I heard the rumor, I didn't even feel angry. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity. They chose to live the rest of their lives inside a fragile, pathetic lie. Life is unpredictable, and time eventually catches up with everyone. 5 years after Matthew went to prison, I received an unexpected phone call at my office. It was a man named Mr. Lincoln, an estate lawyer based in Florida. He informed me in a very dry, professional tone that both of my parents had passed away within 3 months of each other. My father had a sudden, massive heart attack, and my mother, unable to cope with the loss and the stress of Matthew's incarceration, simply faded away shortly after. I didn't attend the funeral. I wasn't invited, and frankly, I didn't want to go. I had mourned the loss of my parents that night in the steakhouse. The people who died in Florida were strangers to me. However, Mr. Lincoln insisted on sending me a certified copy of their final will and testament. He warned me over the phone that it was highly unusual and quite hostile, but he was legally obligated to provide it to all surviving biological children. When the thick manila envelope arrived at my house a week later, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat at my kitchen island. I broke the seal and pulled out the crisp, legal documents. My parents had liquidated their remaining assets, sold their condo, and placed every single penny into an ironclad trust fund dedicated entirely to paying for Matthew's commissary, his legal appeals, and his eventual reintegration into society upon release. But it was the third page of the document that truly captured their legacy. I read the specific clause my father had insisted on including. To our biological son, Carter Mason, we leave absolutely nothing. We hereby explicitly disinherit him from any portion of this estate, any family heirlooms, or any future financial consideration. Carter has proven himself to be a cruel, heartless individual devoid of loyalty, compassion, or family values. He chose his ambition and his pride over the sacred bond of brotherhood. He is no longer recognized as a member of this family in life or in death. I read the paragraph 3 times. I took a slow sip of my bourbon. Most people would be devastated to read such venomous, hateful words from their own parents from beyond the grave. They would feel a deep, agonizing sense of rejection. I felt validated. This document was the ultimate proof that I had made the absolute right choice. Even facing their own mortality, they refused to accept the truth. They went to their graves fiercely protecting a criminal and condemning the victim. If these were their family values, I was incredibly proud to be excluded from them. The next day, I took that specific page of the will to a custom framing shop. I had it matted on black velvet and secured behind museum-quality glass in a solid oak frame. I hung it on the wall in my home office, right next to my FBI commendations and my university diplomas. Every time I looked at it, I didn't feel shame. I felt a surge of incredible pride. It wasn't a mark of disgrace. It was my certificate of liberation. It was undeniable proof that I had survived the most toxic environment imaginable and had refused to let it break my principles. Time is the ultimate equalizer. It strips away the noise, the ego, and the illusions we desperately cling to. 11 years after the arrest in the steakhouse, I was 45 years old. My life was full, rich, and deeply satisfying. I had reached the pinnacle of my career, I was financially secure, and my mental health had never been stronger. One Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived at my office. It was forwarded through the prison system's official channels. The envelope was cheap, thin paper, stamped with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was Matthew's. He was due for early release in a few months, having served 11 years of his 12-year sentence with good behavior. I sat at my desk, staring at the envelope for a long time. I debated throwing it straight into the shredder. I didn't know him anything. I didn't need his closure. But curiosity, and perhaps a tiny sliver of lingering brotherhood, won out. I carefully sliced the envelope open and unfolded the single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was shaky, much smaller and less aggressive than the bold, sweeping script he used to use. "Carter, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to reply. If you throw this in the trash, I completely understand. I have spent the last 4,000 days sitting in an 8x10 concrete cell. When I first got here, I spent the first 5 years hating you. I blamed you for everything. I blamed you for the food, for the violence, for the fact that my kids stopped visiting me. I told everyone who would listen that my evil brother set me up. But eventually, the anger burns out, and you are just left with yourself. You are left with the absolute quiet truth. And the truth is, I put myself here. I was arrogant. I was incredibly stupid. I stole from you because I was jealous of you. You were always everything I pretended to be. You were smart, you were stable, and you were principled. I hated that you were comfortable in your own skin while I was constantly faking my way through life, drowning in debt, terrified that everyone would realize I was a fraud. I stole your money to buy myself the success I couldn't earn. When you revealed who you really were at that dinner, it wasn't just the money that crushed me. It was realizing that you were fundamentally better than me. Mom and Dad are gone. My ex-wife remarried. My kids barely know me. I have absolutely nothing left. And I know, deeply and truly, that it is entirely my fault. I am not writing this to ask for a handout when I get out. I am not asking to be a part of your life. You earned your peace, and I don't deserve to share it. I am just writing to tell you that you were right. You were right to stop me. If you hadn't, I would have kept destroying people until someone much worse than the FBI caught up with me. You were a good brother, Carter. I'm sorry I was a terrible one. Matthew. I read the letter in the absolute silence of my office. I didn't cry, but I felt a profound, heavy shifting in my chest. The last lingering knot of resentment, a knot I didn't even realize I was still carrying, finally unspooled and disappeared. He finally saw the truth. It cost him 11 years of his life, his family, and his freedom, but he finally understood the reality of his actions. I carefully folded the letter and placed it inside my desk drawer. I wouldn't reply. I wouldn't reach out when he was released. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. You can forgive someone for the damage they caused without inviting them back into your house to break more things. I wished him well in his new life, but my life no longer had room for him. Family values aren't about blindly protecting people who hurt you. They aren't about sacrificing your integrity to keep the peace. True family values are about mutual respect, accountability, and standing up for the truth, even when the people you love the most are begging you to lie. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy, but it is the truth of my life. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you have ever had to make the agonizing choice between your family and your own sanity. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? How did you draw the line? I would really love to read your stories in the comments. Also, if you are still here listening to my voice right now, you are part of an exclusive group. I want you to comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. That is our secret code for the 1% Club, the incredible group of people who stick around to the very end of the journey and understand the real value of the story. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and follow the channel. I have so many more stories from my career and my life to share with you all. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and I will see you in the next one.